Welcome to the Guitar Builders Collective Chat, audio and visual podcast, a weekly discussion about all things guitar building and some random tangents as well, featuring members of the Guitar Builders Collective from all around the world. The Guitar Builders Collective is a like-minded group of individuals that have come together to share their experiences, knowledge, and inspiration for guitar building. Each week you can join us in the live YouTube chat or catch up at a later point. It's also available as audio where you'll miss out on seeing our lovely faces and some of the visuals we share along the way. You can also find the Guitar Builders Collective via our forum, over on Instagram where we share images of members' builds. We've got a thriving Facebook group, and we do hope that no matter what your experience and knowledge is, you'll become a welcome member of this community too. Fantastic. Hello, everyone.
Hey.
Morning.
So, as always, for those of you that are watching us on YouTube, you can see our faces and hopefully you'll recognise most of us. But if you're listening on the audio, I'll just do a quick intro. We've got at my far left, right, I don't know how it works on your screens when you're watching. We've got Dave from Footstep Guitars.
Hi there.
Hey. And then we've also got Scott down below from Bonehead Guitars. Yeah, the three of us are quite regular on here, but we've got returning guest of Ty from Shock the Fox. Hey, Ty. Fantastic. And the reason Ty's here is Ty suggested, in his words, a great, or what did you say, a great guy, a great fella? What's your American phrase for this?
Probably a great guy. Yeah,
that's great
probably...
guy. Great guy that he'd met who will be a brilliant guest, and also someone that's a bit different from what we normally have, because as well as making effects pedals, he also makes amps. So we've got Maynard from Madsen Amplification. Is it Madsen Amplification?
Yep, Madsen Amplification.
But also pedals as well. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Fantastic. So look, who knows what we can talk about today, but we're definitely going to focus it in a bit on how Maynard got into amps and pedals and guitars, presumably, about how him and Ty met each other. But I just want to briefly say I'm doing a trial today and I'm going to drop it in the live chat, but this is also going live on Facebook as well as YouTube. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but as far as I can tell, the more places we can easily get this out to, the better. It does mean, though, I've got more chats to focus on, so we'll see how that works. But yeah, if you are watching this and enjoying it, don't forget you can follow the Guitar Builders Collective in loads of different places. So we're on YouTube. We do this every week, normally on a Thursday. Depends on the time, because we try and do a session where we manage to fit in people that are in the Southern Hemisphere, so they can fit in a bit better. We've got on Instagram, there's a place you can see lots of people that are part of the Guitar Builders Collective, all their guitar builds, and you can go and follow them individually. We've also going, hopefully, on everywhere you can get your audio podcasts, which should be out and available. That's quite a new thing for us. So if you're listening on one of those, please leave a review, please share it. We've got to get it out there a bit more. We've got our forum where lots of people interact. And one of the great things about the forum is lots of people share their builds, but also it's a great place for talking about things like issues you're having, ideas you've got, getting help from each other, which is also very similar to our Facebook group. Anyway, enough of that. There's links for all of that below, as there are links to everyone that's here. So let's ask Maynard some questions. And if you're live in the chat, please feel free to drop in as well. So
well, I feel like I'm pretty live. Just some ground rules. Am I allowed to swear? It's been a little while.
So I'll tell you what happened. A few weeks ago, we had Jarvis, who's a guitar instructor online, and he did not stop swearing. Brilliant, that's his personality. And then everyone was really excited for Paul from Mild House Studios, who was on the following week, who in his YouTube videos constantly swears, and he was like perfect, did not utter a single cuss word in any way whatsoever.
So if I can pause, so basically what you said is if I swear that's imperfect?
No, because people were disappointed because we expected some swearing there. So what I'm saying, Ty, is express your personality in any way you see fit.
And once in a while I kind of do, But...
Yeah, no, I got you. I mean, I would expect it. Yeah.
Yeah, I told the story one time. One of the only comments I got before GGBO that was like a negative comment on a video somebody said, the only thing that makes you sound dumber than swearing is a Southern accent. And I didn't like him.
So you said go F yourself.
basically. But since then, it has stuck with me. And since then, I'm like, I tried not to a whole lot on videos. It still happens, but so I would all over the live stream because I do all day long. If if it was my live stream, but since it's Daniel's, I try to be a little easier, but it still comes out.
Oh well, thank you, Scott. But it is all of ours. And what I will say is, strangely, YouTube is bugging me a lot at the moment, and I won't go into that too much now. But when I upload a video, I have to mention if it involves adult language or inappropriate language.
Mm-hmm.
But when I set up a live stream like this, it seems to not ask me. So I don't care if they don't care. I don't care either.
My kids have heard your words adult language since they were very small. So I don't know if that's true, I don't know if it's adult language anymore. Come on.
And how do you define what's appropriate and not appropriate? Because certain words in certain instances are the best way to express an emotion.
This is true.
100% agree. I think it's to do with if they're putting advertising on and someone's paying to advertise, maybe they don't want us swearing. But I don't get much money from YouTube at all, so I don't care. I don't think it's going to put much off.
They demonetized me, and I don't know if I'll ever get it back at this point. So
I never even signed up to get quote unquote monetized. I never did it because it seemed like it was a step I just didn't want to take. Let me say that. I didn't understand how the hell to do it, so I just never did it. During
GGBO, I finally realized that I could, and I did. And I don't know, over like 2 years, I made like $100. And the first time I got a paycheck from YouTube, it was magic. But I am now officially a professional YouTuber, and it was hilarious. But
certainly can't.
The dream is gone.
I'll just do my complaint now about YouTube then. I've been digging into it. Sorry, Maynard. You're here for the self-help group today.
I'm here for it.
So as a lot of you know, I love doing this live stream and all the other stuff we do, but it takes up a lot of time. And I've been recently asking, and I hate doing it, but asking people for a bit of money to help with covering the costs of all the streaming stuff. So people very kindly joined the membership, which is brilliant. Hey, how about I put a little sign up for that now? They've joined the membership, fantastic. But people have also been giving super thanks and super chats and stuff like that. And some people have been really generous. Someone left $99 recently. But then I was looking at the income I'm getting from YouTube, and it doesn't seem to reflect that very much. So I went on and asked that the YouTube help, what's going on? Because I thought they took a 30% cut, but I seem to be getting over 50% taken off. And I just got a round conversation of, oh, look, it's the people that are doing the taking the money, the other platforms like PayPal or whatever, they're taking a cut. And I'm like, well, how much are they taking? Oh, we can't tell you how much are they taking. But you can look in our terms and conditions. And I look in the terms and conditions, and it makes no sense. And just backwards and forwards with very polite people saying, well, I'm very sorry. The best we can do is show you our terms and conditions, but we can't show you the place in the terms and conditions, which tells you how much we're taking from you. But it's basically 40% plus 10% from everyone else. So any money that people are giving for any reason, super thanks, membership or anything, about 50% comes through to me, which is quite sad because initially the first super thanks we did were all for raising money for that leukemia foundation in sort of Jörg's memory, and only 50% of that's coming through. Whereas if you go to somewhere like Patreon, they give an exact breakdown of how much they take, how much other people take in between, so how much each different Visa, MasterCard, etc. take, and how much they're going to charge you for if it's currency conversion. It just seems much more open and pretty obvious what's happening. So I sort of feel a bit gutted that I've bought into this YouTube thing, which is really easy to use, but it's a behind a wall what's happening. I don't really understand what's happening, why it's happening. But there you go.
Tell you, boo hoo.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that.
No. I mean, I don't. The thing that bothers me is if someone thinks they're helping out by giving us money, and then to find out that 50% is going to YouTube.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a shame.
I know. It's crazy. Everyone's getting paid.
But at the same time, you know, it's very helpful. All the money that's come through has helped pay for the streaming stuff, so that's great. Anyway, let's get all of that out of the way. I tell you, just before we started, I was feeling so positive and full of energy and very excited to hear about stuff. So let's get to that. Maynard, can I get back to your early days in guitar or related to guitars? How did you get into it? Where does the love of guitar start?
I think that starts with the love of music first. So, like, my earliest memory of having a favorite song, I was probably like kindergarten. And I remember listening to Tom Petty. And
Nice.
my dad would put it on the stereo, and I loved Tom Petty. So I've just been a music fan for a long time. And I think probably around high school, I got really into audio engineering and wanted to do like recording and stuff like that. And so when I finished high school, I actually went to school for audio engineering. And when I was in school, my guitar amp broke. And I talked to the electronics teacher, and he's like, yeah, bring it in. I'll help you fix it. And so he didn't exactly have the time to like teach me everything because he was teaching classes and stuff, but he'd come in like when the kids were doing stuff. And he'd be like, okay, unsolder this resistor and put this other resistor in there, or, you know, do that stuff. So I didn't know what I was doing, but he was like guiding me through fixing it. At that point, I realized I really like working with my hands, and I'm extremely introverted. So working on gear would be a really good career. And so when I was in audio engineering school was also when the recording industry kind of shifted and everything started going digital, and people were recording in the basements, and the major labels were not giving as big of budgets for records anymore. And so I had met my wife around that time and got married. And so I was like, I can either intern at studios forever and maybe get a job, or I can do something else. And so I ended up working at Sweetwater Sound as a sales guy there. And so I did that for a couple of years. And you were talking about like everybody getting their cut with the YouTube stuff. So that's kind of what I learned when I was at Sweetwater. And what I noticed was there's like specific price points in the market for like pedals and amps. And a lot of these companies would build to those price points. But when you look at budget stuff, like there's two different types of guitar players, I feel like, in the market for an amp. So you have the guys that want something around like $500 with like all the bells and whistles. And then you have the guys that want something that's reliable and sounds great, and they don't care what it costs. And so
or a Marshall stack.
Yeah. And so what I found is that like so to hit those price points, they're cutting corners so they can have more bells and whistles. And within that pricing structure, you also have to have your distributor takes a cut, the company that's selling them takes a cut, the salespeople take a cut. So like one example I would give to another tech I had talked to knew someone at Fender. And so the I think it's the Blues Junior is like $750 or something like that. And so Fender's kind of thing was that everything has to cost about a tenth of what the sales price is for them to build it. So that doesn't include labor, I don't think. But so it basically breaks down to like $75 is what they're putting into that $750 amp. And I mean, they get a huge price break because they're buying in bulk, but
I definitely, it's so interesting. I definitely want to talk about building for price points and all of that, but maybe people in the chat or us five can have a bit of a chat first about when you said some people want all the bells and whistles in the amp and some people are just looking for a great amp. What sort of things do you mean by the bells and whistles? Is that having all the reverb and stuff built in as well.
Yeah, like multiple channels, effects loops, everything. So everything that you add into a circuit with guitar amps is going to affect the tone. So you're able to achieve a wider variety of tones, but typically the more simple a circuit is, the more pure the tone is. So I think people who have played a lot of guitar and played a lot of amps, it's kind of like drinking wine. Like your tastes change and you're able to pick out the subtleties. And so like a really nice, simple amp sounds way better, I think, than something cheaper.
I wonder if that's because we talk about that a bit with guitars, about how some guitarists want all the bells and whistles, as many different pickup options as they can, as many different tone options and volumes for all of those. And I know when I was a kid, I thought that surely the best guitars have all the options on it in one guitar. But I guess you're right. As you begin to play more, for me, I probably just need a volume control and one pickup, and that would do me now.
Well, I know from back when I was a kid up until even now, 100-watt little tiny, bedroom player amp, and now with digital stuff like I said, the Black Star, I mean, you got tons of built-in effects that you'll never actually totally explore. Versus just a workhorse where you want some power and effects you'll take care of. I mean, those are your two scenarios. That really is.
Yeah.
Those top end amps, do they tend to be tube amps these days? Is that or why is that? I mean, is it because of the tone of the tubes, or is it, is it nostalgic? I don't know.
I think it's a little bit of both. I think too, like when you go on the lower end of the market, those amps are designed to be like replaced and not necessarily fixed. And so like a good hand wired tube amp can be maintained, it can be fixed. And then tubes themselves, they can affect the tone, but I think a lot of it has to do with like the transformers and the speakers. So when you're not building to a price point, you can use the best components. And some of those components might be cheap, some might be expensive. But like all those ingredients in your recipe equate to the end result.
That reminds me, I got a little amp that I need to find somebody to look at. And it's got like one tube.
Yeah. I do repairs.
You're probably a ways away from me, I'm assuming.
Yeah, probably.
I mean, Missouri to Texas, I mean, it's not that far, right? Haven't we had this conversation before, Scott? I mean, Texas isn't that big, right?
There are places where, Texas to Texas, you can run out of gas and die. But
yeah.
I didn't realize you were in Texas.
No, he's in Missouri. You're in Texas.
Okay. Well, you could still be closer than somewhere in Texas.
Right.
I was born in El Paso, so.
I was going to say, I mean, El Paso is my example of, some place where you could die on the road.
Yeah.
I had to go there a few times, and gas stations are sparse. There's a lot of cactus and lizards and tumbleweeds and not much else.
Can I tell Daniel? Can I tell the story of how Maynard and I met? Is that cool?
That is cool. Just before you do that, I want to just introduce Mark's managed to join us. Sorry, Mark, you might have been hiding in the waiting
I
to join room. I
apologize.
hadn't noticed.
I'm so sorry I'm late, so unprofessional.
I was almost late.
We're all here now.
A little bit.
You missed my annoying rant. Anyway, let's get to the exciting things. Tell us about how you met each other then.
So there's this fretboard summit that's put on every year. I think it's August. It was August, right, Maynard? Yeah. By the Fretboard Journal. This is the third year that it's been in Chicago, and there's been 5 total. Anyways, I've been lucky to go to the last few, and I follow Maynard. I don't even know how I started following him, or I knew of him, and I think it's just like friend of a friend kind of a deal. And I reached out to him before the Fretboard Summit. Now, keep in mind, I live in Chicago, where the Fretboard Summit is held. I have 2 amps, actually 3 now. I have a little shitty orange like amp that is stuck underneath my bench here that I use to plug in when I'm finishing up guitars. I have a 2x12 cab that I have hooked up to one of those little Black Star modeler type deals, like the little heads. And I'm not saying people are particular there, but I knew I wanted to have something that would sound really good. And I didn't want to have to carry this 2x12 cab because, as someone mentioned in the comments, I'm older now, and lugging that thing around is just a pain in the ass. Anyways, I reached out to Maynard. I'm like, dude, I think you're going to be there. Do you have an amp that you'd like to bring? And we can highlight the hell out of it on in my little area, because I knew I'd be in the electric room, and I knew it would be a competition for sound. And he's like, yeah, man, let me see what I can whip up between now and then. So he came up with this, you could probably describe it better than me, man. I think it's probably there you go. This little guy right here, right? So, and there's a switch on top. I don't know enough about electronics, where I said, you put it to the spot that you think that you're the most proud of, because I knew he could make it do different things. You said it could sound like a Fender Twin, I think, or it could sound like an old Marshall, or I don't even remember what you said. I said, dude, just set it up the way you want people to hear it. Those are my exact words. What are you most proud of? Put it on that, and then we're just going to let it rip for the whole show. Well, he did, and there's actually some footage somewhere. I'm sure it's somewhere on the Instagrams, where the Frank Brothers guys were in the same room as us, and they did a collaboration build with Built Guitars, and also with Philippe Herndon of Caroline Guitar Company, where he jammed one of his old Cannonball circuits inside of this guitar. So it was this 3-company collaboration with this guitar, and this thing it's just a monster. And when I say, I don't know if I was ever both more excited and or scared for somebody as when they had this thing like if it wasn't all the way tapped out at 10 or 11, it might have been. I'd be surprised, because the other guitar guys around this room were looking at what was happening there, and were flipping out. Like actually, some of them were both excited, some of them were nervous, some of them were appalled by how friggin' loud it was. and that was my guitar that you're seeing on screen right now. But this one by the Frank Brothers, it was like, oh my God.
I can't find that at the moment.
It's not, I don't think it's on my Instagram.
Okay.
I don't think. But it might be on Maynard's. I don't know. But holy cow, it was amazing. And anyways, I immediately hit it off with this dude, because probably not unlike any of us, I didn't know that, Maynard, that you were in sales at Sweetwater, and being an introvert like me, that must have just been awful. That's fucking awful. But it's funny, like you learn pretty quickly, like most of us that would rather sit in our garage or our workspace all day long working by ourselves, we're a bunch of introverts, like for the most part. And typically we have ADHD or OCD or some other collaborating type of issues. But getting us together in an environment where all we can do is talk about the stuff that we don't talk about at all day long, it's pretty cool. But yeah, I just hit it off with this dude, and he's eerily similar to most of us in this business, where I guess I would call him a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. He's trying to get a business up and running versus a lot of like these big companies, and he's a small boutique amp builder, makes pedals, probably not huge numbers, and he's trying to keep the friggin' lights on at his house. So anything I can do to help support this dude, that dude,
I appreciate it.
and introducing him to you knuckleheads is always a good thing. We all know a lot of other people, and the people that are listening to this, he makes amazing crap, and I saw it and heard it, and it scared me, and it was friggin' awesome. So yeah, that's Maynard. That's how I know this guy.
What a complimentary introduction. That's amazing. I've got to say, obviously I'll leave links to all of Maynard's stuff below, Instagram, website, etc. And
if you have a question for me, I got to go wake up a 14-year-old, so I'll be right back.
We'll see you in a moment then. Yeah, Maynard, I apologies for not remembering the correct terminology for this, but when I'm looking at like on Instagram at things like your pedal builds, and I can't find a picture, but I saw a picture of the inside of one of your amps as well. What really appeals to me about it is something we talked about on here before, the kind of Joe from Hello Sailor called it the mojo, but it none of it's like PCBs and stuff. It's all direct wiring. Is that what it's called, direct wiring? When you
it's hand wired. So like that pedal is the Somnium. There was a previous iteration of it that was called the GE Boost, and it started off as like a Rangemaster clone, and the switch would switch between different input caps. So you'd get a treble boost or an upper mid boost. And so yeah, it's a little turret and just vintage styled wiring, all point to point. So.
I'm just gonna mute. I think that's coming from Ty. No, I can't mute him. Let's do that. What I was going to say is, as someone, and we've had this in the comments quite a lot before, someone that was, when I was younger, I just had big amps with like all the bells and whistles on. Now, when I see things like that, that appeals to me because I know it's properly handmade. And it's got that quality and love that's put into it. And obviously the problem of Instagram, even on a reel, is you can't hear it properly. So when you hear people like Ty describing that, how it goes down in a room of professionals, that adds something to it that's so bespoke and unique. And I think people are just, we always say about, everyone wants to get a telly. Everyone's just, too many people after what everyone else has got thinking they can make it their own. But as soon as you've got something different like that, it, to me, must surely start making it more unique. Yeah. So knowing nothing about amps, when you're designing your amps, and am I right, you've got one kind of main model that you make that I saw on your website?
Yeah, so I'm prototyping an amp now that's going to be bigger and still simple, just volume and tone, but it'll be about 37 watts or so. So I don't have any pictures of that, but the main amp on the website is the Newton 10, which is the model that I took with me to the Fretboard Summit.
Oh, that's where I saw the wiring. So I'm just, for people that are listening on audio, there's links to all of this below, but we're looking at Maynard's website here.
And so it's basically kind of my take on a Tweed Champ. But instead of using like the fiberboard that was used by Fender back in the day, I'm using G10, which is like a fiberglass board. Because the old fiber boards are great, but they warp over time. They can absorb moisture and you can get noise. They can actually become conductive over time. And I'm in Missouri, so it's humid. So I think about those things. I don't know if it's on the website or not, but I've explained it to people as it's got like a vintage soul, but with modern refinements. And I'm way into astrophysics. I'm actually in college now, like pursuing physics. And so all the wiring in there is also using aerospace grade wiring. And so like a traditionalist would put in the cloth covered wire, but that can also absorb moisture. And the other thing is it's using eyelets, or not eyelets, sorry, instead of using eyelets, it's using flea clips. And that is something that I picked up from studying Ken Fisher of Trainwreck amps.
Right.
And so the really interesting thing about those is because they're so small and they have less mass than an eyelet or a turret, it requires way less solder. So I don't know if most people could hear a difference, but if you use less solder over time, like there's less resistance in the amp than if you put a ton of solder in there.
Hey, I'm just showing some random clips. Here's one of you soldering. So look, what the thing I was going to get at is I sort of understand with pedals that you could take a traditional, like the Rangemaster you're saying, but you're changing the clipping diodes. So that's how you're changing the tone and making it unique. And you've just talked about these sort of changing components and the way you're using them. But and the link to the sort of more traditional Tweed sort of amp. Are there other things that you're changing on the circuit in the way the design works as well? So sorry for being a sort of stupid question for someone that doesn't understand amps.
No, they're not stupid questions at all. Yeah, so like with the Somnium and the GE Boost, there's a couple things that I'm changing about it. Where the resistors, again, kind of like I'm taking traditional things but modernizing them somewhat. So the tone is still vintage, but a Rangemaster is a pretty noisy circuit. And when you use like carbon comp resistors and stuff like that, they can add noise. So I'm using the Mills military grade Dale resistors in there, and it quiets it down. And another thing that a lot of people wouldn't know unless they build pedals is like anytime you're using germanium transistors, they haven't been made since the 70s. And typically I have to get a bunch in and I spend a bunch of time testing them for gain and leakage. And even when they fall within the gain and leakage kind of parameters that I'm looking for, I still have to test them in each pedal, because sometimes they'll test properly, but they sound awful. So a lot of testing goes into building the pedal, and then you want to bias the transistor properly. So you might be changing out some resistor values to make sure that they sound great. So I think that's kind of what separates some of the lower priced Rangemaster kind of pedals and fuzzes on the market, is that people are taking the schematic and they're just following that and like, okay, I'm just using the values that are on the schematic. Here's a fuzz or a boost, and it sounds the way it's going to sound. Whereas I'm looking for a specific tone. And so like the G boost was just a Rangemaster, but with the different input cap options. And I was using like solid silver wire, like a bunch of stuff. And then the whole COVID thing happened, and like the potentiometers I was using in the first iteration of those pedals, like I can't even get anymore. They went from like $15 up to $38. And then the distributors stopped carrying them, and I contacted the company that makes them, and I was like, hey, is it possible for me to order direct? And is there a price break if I'm buying from you? And they're like, yeah, you can order from us, but you have to order 10,000 at a time. And I was like, I'm too small to do that. Sorry. So it took me a couple months of trying different pots to get one that sounded basically the same. So a lot of work goes into even simple things. And the same thing with the amps, where I'm testing components and stuff and trying to make it as reliable as possible and as good sounding as possible. But like the foot switches I use DeMont. And so those are a $15 foot switch versus the industry standard is about $3. And
that's pretty interesting, Maynard. Like that, I remember seeing that. Like I think you did a reel about that, just talking about that. Like whereas most companies will, what did you say the difference was from the amount of functional uses one versus the other? Because I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, so the industry standard pots usually are rated for like 20,000 clicks, and then the DeMont is rated at 200,000.
Right.
That's funny. Yeah, like just a little stomp things on your pedal, like what we're all used to, is 20,000 probably versus the ones that you use is 200, which is nuts to me.
Yeah.
It's like you're like, yeah.
I don't know
Do
how
we
everyone
know?
else
I was going to
feels.
say,
Okay,
like,
Mark.
do we know? Oh no, it's all right. Do we know what the ratings were for the foot switches on like vintage pedals? Like, so the pedals from like the '60s that have been around for like decades and are still working.
They haven't hit the 20,000 yet, Mark.
Okay.
I would say on that, I wonder in the 60s whether people were stomping on them as much as we are now, because our pedal boards have got so much choice on it that we might be putting on an effect for 2 notes at the end of one bar in the middle of the middle 8 or something like that.
Yeah, they only had one pedal back then, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you think of like Hendrix, he only had a couple pedals, but like his fuzz was always on,
Yeah.
and the Univibe was always on, and he used the rocker pedal to like engage it and disengage it and stuff like that. So I think a lot of people are just using stuff always on when they're playing. So
Yeah. Hey, Maynard, I have another question. 2
Yeah.
questions. 1 question, 1 observation. So you were talking about germaniums, and I was wondering, do you have a use case for all those germaniums that don't meet spec? Like, I was in the same position. Like, you get a bunch of Russian germaniums, only 3 work out of the 50. What do you do with the other, like, 47 or whatever? Like, surely there's something we can make with those things or use them for. Have you found any kind of use case? Or you just toss them?
well, I hold on to them. I don't like to sell them because I feel like there's a lot of people selling that stuff, and I think it's disingenuous to like, hey, I've got a bunch of transistors, and then have someone use them where they're not ideal. But one of the things I did with the new pedal is it's more of like a full range preamp type thing and a mid boost. And with playing around with that, I was actually able to use a lower gain transistor. So it's in the gain range that people don't typically use. So I'm able to use a lot of transistors that previously I had just like shelved, which is really great.
Cool.
I was talking to, when I was at the Fretboard Summit, I was talking to Josh Scott from JHS, and we were kind of discussing that. And he's like, oh, that's great, because there's a lot of those on the market still because nobody wants to use them. I'm like, yeah, now I can use them. So that's great, because I can start putting those back out onto people's pedal boards, basically.
Nice.
I've got
Oh
to
yeah.
say,
So
I
the
don't-
sorry, Daniel.
No, keep going, Mark.
Yeah. So back to the pedal that you had on the screen earlier. So the observation is we don't mind, right, point-to-point wiring when it comes to amps, right?
Mm-hmm.
PCBs and amps, right? But when it comes to pedals, that's flipped, right? The whole industry is like PCB, and you don't see a lot of point-to-point with pedals. Again, that's just an observation, but what are your thoughts on that?
So with pedals, you're not subjecting it to as much heat as like in a tube amp. So, and they're smaller, so they're not going to flex and stuff as much. So they can still be reliable, and it depends on the complexity of the pedal. I'm not opposed to doing a PCB in a pedal. But this is, I don't know. I enjoy doing the hand wired thing, and I think it's a work of art inside and out.
100%. And that's why I'm saying, like, we don't see a lot of that. And that actually looks beautiful. And I'd rather have point to point than a PCB.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm totally with you, Mark. As soon as you see that, you know that's in the pedal, you know the effort that's gone into it. And everything you've been saying, Maynard, about testing the different components and even getting a better foot switch, it makes you realize that there is a massive difference between the same circuit built by different people that isn't just simply the way it's built, it's the testing of it all and the personality that goes into it. The fact that you say you know what you want it to sound like means that it's been listened to every circuit to check that it's correct. And that's quality control that you don't get in a factory.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because every single pedal I end up playing through at the end just to make sure it sounds good. And there's times where I'll take it back to the bench and be like, no, that wasn't right, and make some adjustments and stuff like that. So, but yeah,
you should actually put like a clear, like lucite bottom on that damn thing.
Oh yeah, that would be cool.
I did actually talk to a guy about doing something like that, and he's like, yeah, get me the dimensions. And I was like, I don't know how to tell you what the curve is of the corners. And he's like, send me a bottom plate. And so I sent it to him, and it's been like over 8 months, and I haven't heard back yet. So, I'm
Well,
looking.
he's selling that idea around to a lot of other people right now. He's smart.
Probably.
Yeah.
He's scamming it so he can get free back plates. That's what it is.
I saw someone already build like the clear top, right? So they have the clear top on the pedal, and they have the really small turret board with the little kind of posts, and then they use the really large like tube amp components, so huge resistors, huge capacitors, and it looked gorgeous just to see that lined up on this like the rectangular turret board. It was gorgeous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Reeves Electric does the clear bottom plate.
Yeah.
Some of his pedals.
His Instagram is one of the things that sort of turned me on to this idea of the point-to-point and all of that's happening in the boutique market. And as really the only other pedal builder we had on was Joe from Hello Sailor, and doing the same thing. It really appeals to me. And before we started, Ty and myself were just having a chat off screen about Joe said in one of his recent videos that anyone beginning to wire pedals, or I think he was talking about amps as well, needs to develop their own sort of signature way of wiring. And that's kind of started to go around in my head. That one thing I love about this live stream is when we get different people on talking about things that aren't quite what I normally do and how that might influence me. So I just last night made decisions on which colors I'm going to use for my wiring now. And all my wiring is going to be done in the same way with the same colors. I've upgraded all my harnesses so I can get everything perfect. Because even though you won't see it, I feel like that inside is what's important. And Ty, you described it as anything you can do to add your signature to your artwork, another sort of type of signature, is important. And I think that's such a great way of thinking. Definitely, Maynard, seeing that wiring inside your amp makes me realize how different it is to an amp that I'm just going to buy with a PCB printed out and stuff. I love it.
So now I feel dirty. All right, so you've got a 14-year-old. Most of you guys have probably had kids in that neighborhood. Remember you tell them to go clean their room, and what happens? It all gets shoved into the closet. That's kind of how my skull cavity is. It's my dirty little secret. I hope you never look in there.
That's your signature, Scott. That's your signature.
It's like spring loaded. It will explode, and then there's a good chance it'll stop working.
Yeah. Well, on that, I did just send a guitar to someone that the wiring was so complicated in it, and I had to do it so many times because he kept changing what he wanted inside, that every time I was doing it, the components were getting more and more like reused. And in the end, I think one of the problems was just caused by the fact that I just had to jam all this wiring in, because what I needed to do was just gut it all, buy it all again, and do it all again and get it perfect. But sometimes you get to a point where you just want to get it done and you jam it all in. But I don't think, especially after talking to Menno a few weeks ago, that's not the mindset you should have as a builder. You should have the idea, this is your baby you're sending out. It's got. You know
what it is for me, though, when it comes to wiring? It's like, well, first, I suck at soldering. Like, I'm not as good at it as I would like to be, and that just comes to repetition, right? But for me, it's like I can't, like, when it comes to building a guitar, I can visualize all the three-dimensional steps on top of each other. When it comes to wiring, I can't visualize, because I'm literally saying, like, okay, here to here, there to there. Like, I'm following a schematic. I can't visualize all the three-dimensional steps on top of each other to know, like, oh, shit, I wish that wire would have went under this one and then wrapped around here. It would have been so much cleaner. I learned that after the fact, right? Like, I can't see all the pieces together before I start when it comes to wiring for whatever reason. I don't know. Maybe
it is difficult, isn't it? I mean, you sort of start off on the signal chain and you get all the signal right, and then all of a sudden you realise, hang on a second, I've got all the ground now to put in. Where's that going to go? I do know what you mean.
It's like when I wire up my pedal board and I'm doing it all and it's all looking neat, and then suddenly I realise that cable shouldn't have gone over the top, should have gone underneath, and then I've got to rip all out again. But honestly, I find that having chats with people like Maynard on here reinforce to me how those things I don't like so much about the building, or I think are secondary to what's important for me, still really important. And I feel like I'm upping my game with every build because of the sort of conversations we're having like this.
I don't think of finishing and electronics as secondary or less important. It's just I'm not good at them. I know they're my weak points. I ran across a documentary, I don't know, maybe like last month about Dumble, and that was fascinating. I wasn't really looking to get into amp type stuff, but just running across that was pretty fascinating. And it leaves me wondering. I mean, all of it looks like black magic to me. I assume the type of wire you use makes a difference, and different components, or different manufacturers of components. There will be things that matter. I mean, this is physics, but in what way it makes a difference and why, I can't even begin to I wish I had a starting point. I wish I knew where to go to just fall into it, and gradually just start gathering knowledge on that, because I would love to play with pedals and maybe amps someday, but electronics it just didn't penetrate.
Well, you and I have like these hands, these mitts that don't really work in those little tight confined spaces. That's what it is. It's not. We're never going to be neurosurgeons, my friend.
No, I need one, but no. Yeah, you're right.
I do feel like, though, as you're saying, Scott, the more I focus on the things that I don't like as much, the better I'm getting at them. And the more I try to research
during a build.
Yeah.
I've been lying to myself for years about enjoying fretwork. I tell myself how much I love it, but I mean, let's be honest, I fucking hate it.
I've never told myself that. I mean, many times on camera, I say, "This is not my favorite job," and the list of tasks that I say that about is starting to grow. It seems. I mean,
on both those notes, I think there's got to be a better way, right? Fretwork and wiring. And I feel the same way when I look at wiring. I'm like, there's got to be a better way to make it look pretty, right? And so because I design all my control cavities in CAD, I know exactly what they look like. The machine cuts them out. And so I once was scrolling, just scrolling, looking at boutique guitars, and I saw someone who built a custom PCB for the control cavity. I don't know who it was. Maybe it was Prophecy. I don't know. But it was this exact same shape as a control cavity. So it wasn't square. It wasn't rectangle. It was the exact same shape. So clearly they had the CAD
Was it
file.
like a 3D printed thing, Mark?
It was a purchased PCB, right? So all the PCB mounted components, so the pots were mounted. It had all the perfect, neat little components to just plug your wires in. And I thought, I'm going to do that one day. That is a way to kind of like achieve that aesthetic that I've been looking for. It cleans everything up. There isn't a pile of wires. And I don't care what anybody says about pot-mounted PCBs. Like, it'll work, right? You'll get plenty of turns on there. It's not going to break on you. So that's going to be my next step. And then the same thing with frets. Like, fret jobs, there's got to be a better way. There has to be. And I'm working on that too.
Oh, well, then if you've seen Mark's video on not having frets and having...
Take the frets out.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. Like, I always admire, like, so I said before, like, the Frank brothers were there, and they put, like, those little clear plastic things in the back of their guitars so you can see the wiring inside, which is, like, a huge flex. Like, I'm like, you jerks, right?
It's like walking around with no pants on.
But I remember I talked to them. I made sure to, like, pull them aside. I'm like, all right, let's unpack this bag of bricks. Like, because the guy that does all their wiring is this dude on Instagram. His name is Soda Bucket, which is pretty funny. I'm like, can you tell me about Soda and like his whole wiring process? Well, of course, Tim Frank, one of the Frank brothers, is like, oh, I taught him how to do everything he knows, right? But I started asking the questions. I'm like, why do I? My simple question, why do I suck at soldering so much? And he goes, just turn the heat up all the way. That was the only advice I got. Just turn the heat up as far as you can get it. That's all I can tell you. Like, it's not going to look as pretty as the back of some of those guitars, no matter how high I turn the friggin' heat up.
Yeah, guys, this is the antidote to that.
Hold on, just going to get you up there. Hold that up again.
This is bad wiring, guys. Look.
But it's got that lovely PCB in the middle holding it all together.
Yeah. I'm really fortunate that one of the guys who watches my channel is a retired electronics expert. He worked in on speakers and amplifiers, and he's helped me build that little board, his little preamp. But what I want, I just love simplicity, and I mean, at the end of the day, it's just a couple of J FETs in there, and I love the simplicity of your pedal that I saw there. You can see what it's doing, can't you? And you know, it's not hidden in an IC chip. Everything is there, and you can see how it's going to work.
I don't even know what those words are that you're using, Dave. I see chip, and like, is that what part is that?
You open up, a Fender Acoustasonic. You open up the back, and you think, oh, there's like a computer in the back there, isn't there? I mean, what is it doing, really? At the end of the day, put a couple of transistors in there, probably do exactly the same thing. But yeah.
That's funny.
Hey, just on the note of like soldering, Ty, and a question for Maynard. So I was at that point too, where I was like, why am I terrible at soldering? What's going on here? And I didn't actually upgrade my soldering iron. I didn't turn up the heat. The only thing I did was buy a better quality solder. And when I bought the better quality solder, things just worked. I didn't have to like adjust anything in my process. Nothing. It just worked. So Maynard, can you talk a little bit about?
Yeah. So everyone I ask, like, what is the better quality solder? I've gotten every different answer under the.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to hear what Maynard has to say about this. Holy shit.
So what was the question about soldering?
Question was, have you noticed a difference in the quality of solder manufacturers or brands, or
Yes.
or alloys?
So typically people talk about 60-40 for leaded solder, and it takes longer for that to like harden. And so I switched over to 63-37, so it hardens faster. And so one of the things is like I would go to solder something. I was like, oh, that looks good. And then something would move. And then you get a cold solder joint. And so I've got a good Weller soldering iron. I do solder pretty hot. It's not all the way up, but I think it's around 800 degrees is what I have it set at. So I work hot and I work fast. And I will pull the solder away, leave the soldering iron there for a second, and then pull it away. Don't blow on it. So the 63-37 solder, I use Kester for that. That's what I use in all my
Same here. Yeah.
And the pedals, but I've switched over recently. I'm using Cardis solder that has silver in it. And some people are like, oh, don't waste your money on that. That's way more expensive. You're not going to hear a difference. But I've definitely heard a difference. And that's one thing with soldering components, anything, like, don't take people's word on it. Test it. It's better to know for sure, like I hear a difference or I don't hear a difference, than to just base it on what someone is telling you. So I think it's definitely worth experimenting with on anything guitar related.
I think in all my years of soldering things, I've only ever had less than 5 dollops of solder that stayed shiny. I mean, you can't break out the Autosol and keep shining your solder joints. I mean, I don't think that's what you're supposed to have to do. But yeah, I suck at it.
Yeah. That's one of the things I don't like about the lead-free solder is like it never gets shiny really. And so I'm like, is it a good joint or is it not? And so I don't feel confident in using it.
Bring a little lacquer on there. That'll shine it right up.
There you go.
So Maynard, when you're building an amp, how long does it take you typically to build one from sort of scratch?
A pedal or an amp?
No, an amp. Yeah, an amp.
I'd say it's probably between 20 to 40 hours, to be honest. Because I'm taking my time. I'm not trying to rush through it because I'm not trying to pump out a ton of stuff. I sell everything direct, so I don't have any dealers that are like, hey, we need to get a shipment of amps in or anything like that. But I'm like hand drilling the boards and putting the flea clips in there, figuring out the layout, hand soldering everything, testing components. So it takes a bit of time to build one.
Hey, Maynard, just put on the screen a picture from your Instagram feed, which is, I presume, your setup where you work. Yeah. Can you walk us through the sort of things that you've got there? I can see magnifying glass with a light on it, maybe. What are your key tools that you need, really, for pedal building or amp building here?
Yeah, that's in my shed in my backyard. I've got like I think 8x11. So it's a pretty small workspace, but I have low overhead because I don't have a space I'm renting or anything like that. So yeah, all those bins have all my components. Off to the left, you don't really see it. There's like some junk on top of it in the picture, but I've got a toolbox with all my tools. And then the soldering irons there. The light that you can see in the picture doesn't actually have a magnifying glass.
Oh, I made an assumption. Sorry.
It's like a small ring light on an arm, and you can put your phone on there. So like the overhead shots of like me soldering and stuff. It's
nice.
I had to use an oscilloscope in college. I was a physics major for a while, and
cool.
I couldn't tell you anything about the damn thing now. I don't even know where you would buy one, much less how to use it.
Yeah, I don't use it as much as I probably should, but it's helpful in tracking down issues and stuff like that. So,
yeah, I would bet.
Yeah. I look at them on eBay because, like, sometimes science labs or schools shut down and they get rid of them. I think they look so cool, but again, I don't really know what I'm doing with them. I just sort of want one for background shots, bit of a eye candy. Make it look like I'm a professional.
Go. Sorry.
I was going to say, it's kind of interesting because it's intimidating to look at because you've got like all these dials and knobs, and sometimes the words are shortened to make space. So it can be really intimidating, but it's kind of like a mixing board if you've ever done like live sound or worked in the studio, where it's like you've got these channels, and once you know one channel, you can do the rest of it. And so most oscilloscopes, you're going to have like two channels essentially. So it's figuring out what those do, and then it gets a little more simple after that because out of it. But
I can't help but think that if you knew how to use an oscilloscope, then you could make a lot more sense out of what this does and that does, because you can actually visualize it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't even know how to use a voltmeter all that well. I'm bad enough at electronics. I recently got a setup that I wanted to try to build a bending iron, and I got a charcoal starter.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a wire that you just pump electricity into, and this thing gets up to like 850, 850 degrees Fahrenheit, which is retarded and way beyond anything you need for bending. So I also got fader. It's not the right one.
A blowtorch?
Not quite. This thing has 3 wires, and I don't know how to wire it up. The ground came, I think it's the ground, came off of something in the handle of the stupid starter, and I don't even know what the hell to put it back to. So I've been reluctant I bought components to try to build this thing, I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago, and I've been afraid because I don't want to die yet. And I'm pretty sure as soon as I try, I'm either going to blow up out or die.
Can I back up your point, Scott? Zoom in on me here for a second, Daniel.
I'll make you big. Don't worry.
So I'm building this guitar for a buddy's daughter. He just wanted a prop. I'm like, I'm going to build this whole stinking guitar for her for Halloween. This is a Wilkinson pickup that was sitting in my junk drawer. It's got 3 friggin' wires come out, and I'm just doing 1 volume pot. That's it. I don't know how to wire this. Everything else, I'm like, I don't know what these. So literally, I'm going to roll the dice and take a stab at which one's supposed to go where until I get it right. That's how bad I suck at this. Yeah, me, I suck at it, and I'm good with that.
The first amp I ever built was like 10 years ago, and I never turned it on. It looked like a bowl of spaghetti, wires everywhere. And I was like, well, everything's wired up, but I'm afraid if I plug it in, I'll electrocute myself. And so I never turned it on, and it sat in the corner for years and years, just like as a reminder of where I started.
Hold on. Is it there in the room? Is it in the room with you right now? Because I think this is a good opportunity.
Yeah.
Let's fire that sucker up.
Unfortunately, it's not. I ended up salvaging parts out of it last year.
Come on.
I'm pretty sure I told the story about the first build I did on YouTube, which was probably like the 3rd actual guitar I built. I decided I was going to do the Jimmy Page wiring and everything, and I had all these push-pull pots, and I wired all this shit up, and absolutely nothing worked. I started stripping things off to try to simplify it, and still absolutely nothing worked. I wound up putting that whole wad of shit in a bag, and I've hauled it around for near 10 years, and I don't remember if the last build or the build before that, still used a component out of that bag.
You know what, Scott? I realize as I'm looking at everyone's faces, as you and I are sharing, we're basically showing everyone the Emperor has no clothes, right? That I'm looking at Maynard and Mark and Dave and Daniel. Their faces of disgust and disappointment in our abilities is so evident, and it makes me happy in a weird kind of way.
I've always taken pride in I don't know. That's probably a fairly American attitude.
Just sheer disgust.
No, I'll tell you what it is. It's not disgust. It's you're talking sense. That's what you're doing. So a while ago we had Kent Malloy on from Tunguska Guitars, and he's recently, or maybe it was a year ago now, partnered with someone called Mark to make guitars together, because Mark is really good at wiring and loves it. Mark's really good at some other tasks, that the ones that Kent doesn't like doing as much. So between them, they can now make guitars where they look amazing, they're really well built, and everything about them is great. But I think that's what I was trying to get at before. When I'm seeing people like Maynard doing the point-to-point wiring, I realised, for me, that's what I want inside my guitars. Mark was talking about how he wants the next level is the PCB element for him. But for me, it's the getting my wiring to look like, I mean, it's not going to be as complicated as an inside of a pedal that Maynard builds, but that kind of quality and craftsmanship internally, the things that people aren't going to see. So that's like my new ambition. So it's going to be lots of trying things out and practicing to get that. But I found that inspirational for me. So I'm not judging you. I'm just saying that it makes sense that why should everyone be good at everything?
Listen, the person in front of the courtroom is called a judge. He's fair and impartial. I'm okay with being judged in this situation. It's okay. I'm good with it. You should be too.
I've thought a lot about the fact that guitar building, you got so many different disciplines and areas and mediums, and the finish to the woodwork to the design to, I mean, all of these. There's so many different skills that go into this that when people ask questions, they have no idea just how many disciplines there are to deal with here.
It is. I'll tell you what. I'm no good at it either, guys. This guitar here. This is my scraps caster, Telecaster made out of scraps, and Daniel very kindly provided me a couple of pickups, a couple of old pickups, and this one is what would be the center pickup of a Strat, and this one is the neck pickup. Now then, when I've got it on each of the single ones, it hums. When I put it in the middle, It works like a humbucker. All the hum goes. I've no idea why.
So I tell you, so I'm getting back to the being inspired by people. When we have, for example, once a month we have a slightly different timing, so we can get some of the Australians in. And one of those people based out in that part of the world in New Zealand is Glyn from Mr. Glyn's Pickups. And following his channel, you hear him talk about how and why he wires or winds his pickups in certain ways. And these are all things that I hadn't really thought about in detail before. I mean, maybe if I was a player, a professional player, I might be thinking about the tones like that. I might be noticing the differences, but they're all part of the guitar. So I feel like I enjoy learning more about these things and how they work. And that's definitely informing the decisions I'm making on my guitars. Whereas before, I definitely would have just, if it's a bridge or neck pickup for a Strat, fits in any of them, that will do, kind of thing.
Fellas, I hate to do this, but I have to take my twins to high school right now. It was awesome. Maynard, good luck with these knuckleheads.
Thanks.
They're the best. And guys, as always, you do amazing work. Thank you, everyone, for making.
And we're going to see you again in a few weeks at the beginning of November when Godfrey, from Godfrey Guitars.
Les, I can't wait for that. I was talking to him this week. He's a great dude. All right, guys.
Always a joy.
Cheers.
See ya.
See ya.
Bye, tight.
Going back to that thing of like not always getting everything right. I'll show you something real quick.
Oh, I love show and tell. We got to do more show and tell.
I've picked some things out on the Instagram of Maynard's that I want to ask him about, a bit of show and tell.
So I can build the pedals and the amps and stuff, and I put together this Strat. I'm a huge Rory Gallagher fan, and his Strat's being auctioned, but I can't afford that. So this is like in tribute to his guitar. And so I wired this up super quick because I was hoping to take it with me to the Fretboard Summit for people to try out the stuff. And this volume control, I wired up wrong, so when you turn it down, it doesn't do anything. So I got to fix that. But
I like that. What I like about that is it's like when you're jamming at rehearsal and someone looks at you and says turn down, you can just turn the volume down.
I have a tendency just in the last few builds to wire my pots backwards for no apparent reason. I have no idea why. The tone is backwards. I have one of them, both the tone and the volume were backwards, and I'm like, how did I do this? I don't.
Yeah.
Somehow I got it wrong on my diagram because I would, kind of hand draw the diagrams because there was never a diagram that really fit what I needed. So I'd kind of piece stuff together. And I guess I got it wrong on the diagram and I just keep wiring it backwards. It's just idiotic. On guitar 33, it doesn't make sense.
Oh, look at this. Owen said that Rory Strat is from Cork, where Owen is. The shop owned by his cousin originally sold it. They tried to raise enough money to buy it back, but only raised 70,000 and couldn't still afford it. That's mad. We didn't ask Eddie when he was on from Electric Lady Guitars the other week, but the person he learnt lutherie from built guitars for Roy Stewart. But I wonder if he ever met. That would be cool because he seems to have met everyone. He met. Was it AC/DC and Black Sabbath? Yeah,
that's cool.
Menno's got a quick question. Do you know how many guitars you've built, Scott? And to everyone, like Maynard, do you know how many pedals you've built? How many of yours are out there in the world?
33.
I'm impressed.
It's kind of hard to. You have to. The beginning is a little fuzzy, so you kind of have to arbitrarily decide this was number one, and for me, number one and number two were built at the same time. It was the first time I tried a full, truly electric guitar with a truss rod and more than 4 strings, and 33.
Wow.
If it was more than that, I would probably lose track of the number, but I actually have them written down. And do a serial number, and when you're not even in double digits yet, I decided that binary looked more impressive. 1002, 1001. Wow. So I've had to keep track of it just so I know what serial number to put on them. But it's 33.
Yeah, for my pedals, the G boost, I did 30 of those, and those all sold out. Well, technically, I have one that I'm saving for a giveaway that I'm doing on Instagram. And so I put serial numbers on those, and then I think the first 5 or 6 fuzz faces that I built have serial numbers. But there's like a bunch of random pedals that I've built and sold, and some that are still in my shop. When you guys were talking about like figuring out wiring, usually there's 1 or 2 pedals where I'll hand drill everything and try to make sure everything fits, and then figure out how I'm going to wire it and get that down, and then I'll start working on the ones I sell. And I'm writing everything down too, but I've switched. So I'm a huge fan of Ken Fisher of Trainwreck Amps, and all of his amps never had serial numbers because he felt like, since I'm hand wiring these and they're all similar, because he only had 3 models, but they're still individual works of art and they have personality. So he started using female names instead of serial numbers. And so I'm way into astrophysics. So I was like, I want to do something similar, but I'm not going to use female names. What am I going to do? So I started using star names instead of serial numbers. And so it's kind of like twofold. Like, in one aspect, it's like because they're all individual. And on another hand, it's like, I kind of don't want to use serial numbers anymore either. Kind of like, it's not impressive when you're not in like double or triple digits or anything like that. And then there's another side of it where it's like pedal people sometimes will like buy stuff because it's like, oh, it's got this low number. And then, people are scalping pedals online, and I hate that. Like, my pedals are already expensive because of what I'm doing with them, and I'd rather people be able to buy them for that price.
And to come full circle, most stars have a basic name that sounds like a serial number anyway.
Yeah.
Well, there's a database now that's a conjunction between NASA and the European Space Agency. And so they're taking all those and they're adding actual names. So a lot of it's based off like mythology or like different stories and stuff like that. So currently there's like 2,000 different stars that are named. And when you go to the database, it'll give you like the number name, and then it'll give you the new name that they're using, and then the coordinates. So I've been using that website. And so all the amps and pedals are now getting those names.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
That is very cool. I love it. It adds to I've just shared a picture of one of your pedals. It adds to the sort of artistry, I think, or the everything about the pedal going together, from the components you're saying have that. What did you describe the wiring as? You said
point to point.
No, you used a certain type of wiring. It's on your website.
Yeah, it's aerospace grade.
Aerospace, of course. Sorry. Aerospace wiring. Then you've got the sort of space look to it and the naming. I think that's so cool. Are any of those stars named after people yet? Like, I think Brian May feels like, when you were talking about your aerospace, I was thinking Brian May. Can you get a pedal to him? That'd be cool.
That would be cool. If anybody knows how I can get one to, let me know.
No, I don't know. Or someone in the chat is going to tell us. Maybe not. But please do if you do. But yeah, I wanted to show the pedal I'm sharing. I just love the look of it because again, it's like an artwork. It looks like, have you like finished it in nitro and then burnt it or something? Have you done? How have you had that?
So here's the normal finish. So I have them powder coated and UV printed, including the knob, which apparently this is the first time that's ever happened. So
wow.
The knob is UV printed and powder coated. So the earth is the knob. So there was an issue, like it's all a learning process. So this was the first time that I had a pedal where I had it sent off, and they took the enclosure and they drilled it, powder coated it, UV printed it and everything. And I got the hole sizes wrong. And so I try to drill the LED as part of the rocket ship, so it lights up like one of the windows. And so I was trying to like carefully drill them out bigger because the LED wouldn't fit in the hole, and it chipped two of the enclosures. And I was like, shoot, like what am I going to do with these two enclosures? I'm just doing things in small batches, so now I have two less pedals to sell. And I was sitting around the fire, and I was like, well, I've done a normal fire patina before. I wonder what would happen to a powder-coated UV printed pedal. Threw them in the fire.
Oh, wow.
And so that's how it turned out. So each one of those, I plan on every time I do a batch, I'll do a couple of those. But they all end up individual because I don't know what the fire is going to do to them exactly. So
Wow.
I think that's cool. It's like a creative way of thinking, which I love on it. Hey, look, I've just seen in the chat a couple of things. I'm just going to share them on here. Owen said that Joe Bonamassa is doing 3 nights in Cork next year playing Rory songs. I have to find out the date for that, Owen, because as a family, we've been talking about going to Cork, so that could be an excuse. And then Eddie said that Chris Eccleshall, that he taught him, did a lot of work on Rory's guitars, built several instruments for him. All of the ones are in the auction, and one of them is coming to him for some TLC. So we'll have to find out a bit more about that. That's cool.
Wow.
When that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was one other thing of yours that I wanted to share. Let me just find it, because we've been talking a lot about like Arran, who's not on this week, with all the time changes that are happening for daylight saving, etc. Unfortunately, it's meant that to have Americans and Australians on at the same time, it means somebody's got to be up at the wrong time of day. Mark's pulled the short straw for a future one we're planning, so he'd be up in the middle of the night. But Aaron's been talking about the guitar he's been building so he can test everything out on it. So it's one guitar with so many holes on it that he can put all his different setups in it, test everything out and get it right. And then I saw on your Instagram this little setup you've got that just looks so cool. Which can you explain what it is? It's a partly a Boss Metal Zone pedal, partly another Boss pedal behind it, but you've used the sort of, I guess you've gutted it and you're just using the shell to test something on.
Yeah, so my mentor sent me the blue enclosure. So it was an old Boss chorus or whatever, and it was just the enclosure who his mentor had, and basically he was like, you can have it, you can do whatever you want with it. And we had been talking about testing capacitors for the outside foil, and he had showed me a little box that he built. I was like, oh, well, I've got this enclosure, this will work. And it didn't have the foot button part of it. So I went on a forum and on Facebook, and I asked people, I was like, does anybody have like some random Boss parts? And so a guy sent me the Metal Zone part of it. And so eventually I'm going to add some switches onto this where you can flip both sides and also kill it to ground. But basically what you do is you plug it into a small amp and you put your caps on there, and you can test for which side is quieter. So if you put all your outside foils to ground, it makes the amp a little bit quieter. So people argue all the time whether or not it works, but in testing, I found that it definitely works. So,
Wow.
So yeah, I went to the hardware store and had to use those large washers to make it fit right. But it's pretty simple.
It looks cool. I love seeing test equipment and jigs. So fascinating. I feel like I've got a massive collection of books of guitars, just photos of guitars. And sometimes it's just guitars. Sometimes it's guitars that belong to famous people, or sometimes it's all the best Fenders or whatever. I just got one which is 75 years of Fender Custom Shop. No, sorry. How many years? 25 years of Fender Custom Shop photos. I think I'm more into now seeing a collection of people's jigs and test equipment. That just fascinates me so much.
Is that the Dream Factory book?
Where is it? So there's a new Fender Custom Shop book out, and because of that, the old one, which was 5 years old, was selling a bit cheaper. So it was that one. So I don't know if it's called the Dream Factory, but I bought that one. I thought that's enough inspiration for me in that one book.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been looking at. There's a lot of fiddling that seems to happen with books online, and I think it's because, from what I'm learning from, so I'm writing a book at the moment on customizing guitars, and what my editor was telling me is that what they do is every couple of years they review it, see if it needs any updating, and every 7 years they do a new cover on it. But what I've noticed is a few books, when they get their new cover or their whatever's fiddling with it, the name changes. It's exactly the same book but with a different name, and it's very hard to work that out from Amazon. When you're buying online, you can't really tell. So there's a risk there of buying the same thing. So the one you're talking about might be what I've got with a couple of extra pages. Who knows?
Gotcha.
I'm definitely going to be doing some YouTube videos about them because they're fascinating.
Yeah. If it is the Dream Factory or similar, I've got that book, and I love looking through that, getting ideas and stuff like that. So,
well, it's got some photos of it as well of the custom shop team at different points in time, and you can see sort of people that are still there and when they were there 20 years ago and how much younger they look, and it makes me wonder, because I haven't sat down in front of a computer to look on LinkedIn or what everyone's now doing for their jobs, but I wonder what the transition's been. Because there's a few people I follow on Instagram that are builders without having realized their kind of history. So like Neil Moses, someone I've been following for a while, brilliant stuff. But I think, as far as I remember, he worked with BC Rich for a long time and probably some other builders and makes incredible stuff now. But I wonder what influence he had on some of those builds, because I imagine a lot of the big designs for big companies, they're kind of in many ways nameless. It's the company name that goes on it, not the artist that designed and made it.
Yeah,
it's a shame if that's kind of lost somehow.
Yeah, you know,
which is back to boutique pedals and boutique guitars. That's one thing I love about that boutiqueness, is getting that knowledge that there is that follow through from the start of the design through the build to the testing it, that you know there's something there that's got that whole story and the quality to it.
Mm-hmm.
When you were talking about price points earlier, I want to get back to that as well. That was right at the beginning of the conversation. But the idea of why are there price points? What are the price points? Because I know a bit more with guitars, the sort of price range. There's the beginner guitar when you want to learn. There's you buying your second guitar. There's the people that are more into collecting and want something that's or like a thing that's going to last them for ages and maybe go up in value. So there's those sort of values of things, but I wondered how it works with amps.
Well, when I worked at Sweetwater, that was 2008, 2009. So I don't remember exactly where the price points are, but it probably would be pretty easy to go to their website and like sort by price, and you'd see like there's a bunch of like $299 and a bunch of $399 and a bunch of $599 or whatever. So it's kind of like there's a bunch of little steps up to about 1,000. And then once you get past 1,000, then it's a little more diverse. You kind of hit like 1,500. And then everything beyond that is going to generally be more boutique, more expensive. And some of those companies are still fairly big, but they're building hand wired amps. So you're going to see like Friedman and Bogner and stuff like that. So
it's interesting because I recently bought an amp. I play bass. I used to have a PV amp that I bought off someone really cheap that was pretty good, but it was such a pain gigging with it. It was so heavy. It didn't fit in certain boots of certain cars. And in the end, although I had pedal boards and stuff, I just ended up going through a little Sans amp box into the whatever PA system everywhere had when I was gigging. But I realized I want something that's a good small bass amp for my workshop. So when I was shopping around for it, I wasn't looking at the price. I was looking at the kind of wattage that I wanted. Yeah. And that was sort of how I was making decisions. And so it was only a small amp, a 30-watt amp. But looking at videos of people like Andertons or GAC talking about the amps, there were definite, I mean, there's a limit, I guess, to how expensive a 30-watt amp's going to be. but there were definite price jumps, but they're all relatively cheap in many ways. But then you've got these really cool looking boutique ones that were 3 or 4 times the price, but you could see the quality. It was back to what you're saying. The one I ended up buying has loads of effects and stuff in it, but then you see the one that I wanted, it just doesn't have any effects. It's just a really solid piece of kit that's clearly the person's thought about how it works in different settings, and their advertising really sold it to me. But it's back to the point-to-point wiring, the quality of it all. What was my point there? My point there was I wasn't buying for price range. I was buying for my need for it all.
Yeah.
But getting back to those price ranges, like when we were just talking about the price ranges, like up to 1,000, beyond 1,000, none of those amps that you buy commercially are hand wired, right?
Very
price level.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's any that are under 1,000 that are hand wired. I probably, well, I was going to say, I don't remember the company name, but if I remembered it, probably shouldn't say it either. But there's one of the bigger companies that is advertising that they have a hand wired amp. But in the videos, it's a PCB, and the type of sockets that they have mounted to the PCB to put the tubes in are for wave soldering. So they might be hand populating the PCB, but it's a wave soldering machine soldering it. So you put it on a little conveyor belt, and this hot solder just like goes over all the contacts and solders it real quick. So I'm like, that's a little misleading calling it a hand wired amp. I know for a while there was a Harmony, I think, amp that came out for a little bit that was right around $400 or $500 that they were hand wiring. But that was a pretty limited run. So typically you just don't see hand wired when it's cheaper like that. So
we had Jesse on a while ago, Jaybird Custom Guitars, as a guest, and he was talking about when he worked with Gibson and what they called handmade versus what we would call handmade as bespoke builders. And it is quite deceptive what handmade really means in that kind of advertising world.
Yeah. Interesting.
Hey, look, we try not to talk much beyond an hour and a half, Maynard, but can you tell us a bit more? That we briefly talked over the amp that you're working on, the sort of different amp to your Newton 10. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that, or is it still too early to talk about what it's going to be?
I know basically what it's going to be, so I can talk about it a little bit, but there's still a lot of things up in the air. So I'm working with Brian Sowers at Sour Sounds on some custom transformers for it. It'll be right around 37 watts using EL34s, just volume and tone, and then there's going to be a very simple like wattage selector on the front of it as well. So there's a simple power scaling thing that I was talking to Chris Benson at Benson Amps. So it's the same design that he's using. So he's using a 6L6 tube as a voltage regulator. And so even though it's a solid state rectified amp, it feels like a tube rectified amp. And as you turn the volume down, like you're still retaining that tone. And then when you go really low, it adds a little bit of compression and saturation. So it's a really cool sounding circuit. And he was talking about that amp that he's using it in. And I was like, I want to steal that design. And he was like, no, if you want the schematic for that part of the circuit, like I'll send it to you. I want other builders to use it. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. So that's been really cool. Just like the amount of collaboration between builders and like helping each other out.
It's good to hear that exists in that boutique world as well. So quick question for you then. When you say you're having things built to try out the sounds, how do you know what you're looking for? Are you comparing it to other amps that you've got and you want something in between them, or is it sort of you've just got in mind what you're aiming towards being unique and you've just got to keep trying until you get that?
It's a little bit of both. So I know kind of what I'm going for. So it's kind of like the rawness and the simplicity of like a tweed amp. But kind of like one of the things that I did early on a couple years ago, I had reached out to a guy who had like a picture of his amp collection, and he had like a bunch of Two Rocks and Dr. Z and Matchless, a bunch of really nice amps. And I was like, hey, what do you think is missing from the boutique amp market? And he's like, here's my number. Call me right away. I want to talk about this. And I was like, yeah, sure. So I called him up, and he's like, nobody's building a really great train wreck on the market. Could you build me one? And I didn't know if I could or not. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Give me a day or two, and I'll figure out a quote for you. And so I think it's on the Instagram, but it's the big flamed maple cabinet that's dyed gray. And so that took me on this whole journey of like looking into Trainwreck and talking to people that knew him, and just really diving deep into electronics. And so I built that amp as close as I could without actually having a Trainwreck next to me. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a clone. It's more of my interpretation of the Liverpool circuit. But plugging into that amp and just how harmonically rich it was and how touch sensitive it was like a revelation to me. And like, it was the first time I plugged into an amp, and I was like, I don't miss reverb, because there's like so much harmonic content there that it just it feels alive. And so without cloning that circuit or anything, I just, through experimenting, have learned certain things that will make an amp more harmonically rich, more touch sensitive. And so I'm incorporating things that I've learned over the last couple of years into this amp. So rather than just like cloning a circuit, I'm kind of taking building blocks and like putting them together to get the amp that I want. Something simple, but super responsive and harmonically rich. But I mean, it's like state-of-the-art 1950s technology. You can't really do that much new. It's just the way that you're putting it together. And when it's a simple circuit, whether it's a pedal or an amp, your personality can come through, because I'm using my ears to tune it and everything. And so I'm really excited for it. And it should be through the winter. I'll be prototyping it, and I'm hoping in the spring it'll be ready, and then I can start putting some content out about it, and I'll take it to some trade shows and stuff like that with me. So,
well, I hope I can make it to Fretboard Summit one day and hear it in real life.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Or even one of them might end up in this country. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Also, there earlier, someone was asking about if there's a difference with tubes, and I think there's different circumstances for everything. So, like if a guy's in a cover band and playing at a bunch of gigs, like having something small, whether it's digital or solid state, or a tube amp that has a lot of bells and whistles, like that makes sense in that scenario, because they're covering a lot of different tones. But I think when it boils down to like someone that's just really just playing whatever they play, or they're just wanting really great tone, a simple amp works way better. And what I've found in listening to a lot of those things is like, it's cool to have all the effects and stuff, and it's inspiring. But when I'm just going for a great guitar tone, like there's a certain 3D element to the sound. Like there's depth to the tone with a great tube amp versus something digital.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you get the benefit of tube when it's, under 8 on the volume?
Sorry, I think I missed the beginning part of that.
Do you get the real benefit of a tube amp if it's not, near cranked?
Depends on the circuit design.
What little I understand is, something about the tubes are special because, once you push them hard, there's a voltage sag that almost gives kind of a slapback type of thing. Or is that all retarded?
Voltage sag is usually coming from a tube rectifier. I mean, to a certain extent, because they're all drawing current, it happens in other tubes as well. But usually when people are talking about a sag and that kind of slap back effect, that's with a tube rectifier. And there's different tubes, so some of them have less sag than others. You can add circuitry into a solid state rectified tube amp that will give you sag. And typically the rectifier is going to affect the feel more than the tone. But the caveat to that is if you're a shredder and you're playing through a Marshall, the difference between like a solid state and rectified Marshall is that when you're playing really fast runs, the solid state rectified one will stay tighter, where it'll get a little bit muddy on a tube rectified one.
All I know is that the people I have heard talk about, praising the old tube amps, they were generally talking about that. And it sounded like you had to be, pretty high volume for it to really, do what makes those magical.
Yeah. Well, what happens there is typically when you're pushing an amp really hard, you're getting compression from the tubes along with that saturation. And so usually you have to push it pretty hard to do that. But that's one of the reasons why I like building boost pedals, because you can have a lower powered amp like on the edge of breakup and then hit it with that boost, and then you can get that same effect.
Without scaring the neighbors.
Yeah. So like this little 5-watt amp that was at Ty's booth can get pretty loud, but it's also fairly reasonable because it's only a 5-watt amp. But like a 37-watt amp is going to be pretty dang loud, or a 100-watt amp is going to be really loud. So I think there's a certain level of like, if you want that tone, you almost need to be willing to, like, rather than spending lots of money chasing that tone by buying a lot of stuff and selling it and like losing money because the resale value isn't necessarily higher, figuring out if there's a way to, like, I've got this spare bedroom where I have this shop. Why don't I build like a control room and I can listen through monitors, and then I can build like an isolation booth and like have my cranked Marshall stack in that room and have it mic'd up, not disturb the neighbors, not disturb my family, and like listen through some nice monitors. And then on top of that, like coming from an audio engineering background, a lot of the really great tones that we hear on records, like part of that distortion sound is the speaker being mic'd up. And so the time-based effects are added after the fact. So if someone invested in building, and it wouldn't even have to, like, my recording interface was like $200 or $300, like a cheap interface. And an SM57 isn't that much. So like building the room might be the most expensive part of this equation. But then,
Maynard,
yeah.
Oh, sorry. Just a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Since we're kind of on the topic of tubes, what are your thoughts on vintage tubes versus Chinese-made tubes versus like made in the USA tubes, and from a tonal perspective?
Okay. I lost my train of thought for a second. Hold on one second. Yeah, to finish that last thought. So yeah, if you have it mic'd up, you're going into your interface, then you can add the delay and reverb and stuff after you've mic'd up your speaker. And then on to the tube question. So there's only a couple of factories making tubes right now in Russia and China. And I have a bunch of vintage tubes. The 5-watt amp has vintage tubes in it. If you look on the website, I sell that amp with vintage tubes. There is a tonal difference. But it also depends. Like a simple amp like that, you're going to hear the difference between tubes a lot more. If you're going for a higher gain amp where you have a bunch of cascaded gain stages, it doesn't matter as much. So for something like that, the preamp tube, the first gain stage, is going to matter the most. But for the most part, most of the newer tubes sound pretty good. So it's just a small incremental boost in tone if you go with something vintage. The biggest thing is reliability. So like the new tubes just don't last as long. But there's a really interesting thing. A guy reached out to me. The company is called Ray Tubes. And so they're going into these factories and buying the tubes direct from these companies and like rebranding them, kind of like Groove Tubes used to do back in the day. And so since they're buying enough, they can go in and test all the tubes and pick the best out of what these factories are making. And they're going to be offering them with a 1-year warranty, which is unheard of right now. And then they're trying to get into the German market, but in Germany, they want them to have a 2-year warranty. And so they're going to be working on making sure they can do a 2-year warranty. So that's really appealing to me. And then Western Electric is the only company I know of that's making tubes in America. And right now they just have the 300B, which is a hi-fi tube. So they're like $600 a piece or something like that. But they have a 5-year warranty. And when the Ukraine-Russian war thing happened and like all the tubes disappeared, that was an interesting thing because people were like, oh, that's just fake. That's not really happening. And I was like, no, as an amp builder and a repair person, like there was a good 4 months where I couldn't get tubes.
Absolutely. And so on that note, do you think the guitar amp tube will ever go extinct?
No, I don't think so.
See, I heard this very similar conversation on the Chasing Tone podcast with Brian Wampler. And he was talking about taking his teenage son who plays guitar into whatever rehearsal room it was with a massive sort of amp stack with tube amps there because his son only plays through digital stuff, thinking he'd blow his son away. And his son was like, yeah, that's cool. But wasn't like blown away by it. It was like, yeah, that's good, but I'll keep using my Kemper or whatever it is. And they were having a discussion about the fact that there's just kind of middle-aged men in the guitar and hi-fi world. I mean, maybe I'm stereotyping what they were saying here, who are keeping the tube market alive. And at some point they felt that would die out. But I've got to say, having seen more and more boutique builders using them, it does feel like there's a whole new market opening up for them. But whether that's big enough to maintain an industry.
Right. Is it lucrative enough to maintain these factories building tubes?
Yeah.
You know, when all the middle-aged men die off, right?
Yeah.
Well,
I used to work.
Because Western Electric is actually working on making 12AX7s now. So there will be another American-made 12AX7. And so people speculate about that all the time. And they're like, oh, it's been like 2 years and we haven't seen anything. But when they brought the 300B back into production, it took them 5 or 6 years because they modernized some of the ways that they built them. And then they took a whole year of just like building them and testing them before they released them onto the market. So I think eventually we'll see them. And I think to a certain degree, like the younger generations are more into like using like the neural DSP type stuff or like a digital floorboard or something like that. But I think there's always going to be, even if it's a small percentage, those people that love just a simple, nice tube amp. So it might become more and more expensive per se, just because if the market shrinks, I think there'll still be some brands that are like, oh, we're still going to manufacture these tubes. And I hear the argument all the time, like, oh, you should switch over to like surface mount stuff because they're going to stop making through hole components all the time. But there's like Jupiter Effects, or not Jupiter, Jupiter Condenser making capacitors in America. So I think there'll always be, even if it's a small part of the market, people that are into like the hand wired vintage construction and tube tone and stuff like that. So,
hey, look, just before we go, there was one question in the chat which I'd like to quickly cover if we can, which was Eddie from Electric Lady Guitars. He says, does the open back or closed back cab set up designing effects? But actually, along those lines, what I'd also like to ask is, how much is the cab enclosure itself part of your design process and experimental process, or is it's just going to fit in this?
You definitely have to keep that in mind. With a tube amp, the two biggest things that are going to shape the tone the most are going to be the transformers and the speakers. So you kind of have to know what you're going for. So that'll inform the transformer design and what speaker you're going to use. And then you can kind of experiment from there. But like going back to Ken Fisher of Trainwreck, he had one 4x12 cabinet that he tuned all the amps he built out of. And so, yeah, it's super important, like how you're going to do that. And so like a closed back cabinet is going to change the bass response. Certain speakers are going to be more efficient in a closed or open back cabinet. So for like the small amp, that was my take on the Tweed Champ. So I kept the traditional cabinet. Mine is slightly larger just to allow more room for a speaker, because it's got a 10-inch speaker instead of an 8-inch speaker. And the magnet's a lot bigger. So I needed to make sure like the chassis wasn't resting on the magnet or anything like that. So it definitely affects the tone if it's an open back cabinet or a closed back cabinet. And even the size of the speaker can change it. So if you have a 10-inch speaker, it's going to be a lot tighter in the low end, but you're not going to have as much low end response. A 12-inch speaker, a 15-inch speaker, you're going to have a lot more low end. And people always think like a 15-inch speaker on guitar is going to be too muddy. It rolls off the highs just slightly, but it's a very smooth top end. So I actually really love 15-inch speakers for guitars. So, and you were talking about 30 watt amps for bass. There was an Ampeg B15 from 1966 that came in, and I loved playing guitar through that. If I'm ever back on the show, I'll tell you a crazy story about that amp.
Oh, well, that's trailing ahead. I was thinking, Maynard, obviously, be very welcome to have you back. But as the first amp sort of specialist we've had on, what would be great is to invite anyone that knows anyone in the chat or who's watching in the future, suggest a few other people. And then what we can do once we've had a few guests on is maybe get them all together and they can have an in-depth amp chat that we're sort of don't follow because it's too detailed for us. That'd be brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to do that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Right. So, well, thanks again, Maynard. Look, anyone that's listening or watching, there's links to Maynard's website, Instagram, YouTube in the description, as there are to the rest of us. I won't go through now because we're kind of overrunning how many ones we've already got lined up for future live streams, but you can see the playlist of the next 6 weeks scheduled in advance through the links in the description. You can also support us through buying merch and affiliate links and stuff. But the best thing is just leaving some comments, doing a bit of sharing. Love all that. So thank you all again. Thank you for watching and listening. And next week, just to let you know, next week's one, we've got where are we? Oh, we're going to have Jamie, who's just appeared in the chat. Excellent. He's going to come on a bit and talk about what it's like getting into guitar building through things like the Great Guitar Build-Off and the Yergs Cup. And we're going to have a bit of focus on the Yergs Cup again. So cheers, Maynard. That's brilliant.
Thank you very much. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
See ya.
See ya.
Bye. The Guitar Builders Collective is a group of like-minded people from all around the world at different stages of their guitar building journey. You can join us over on our forum to seek advice or share tips on guitar building processes, materials and tools, or just to share your builds. On YouTube, we have a regular podcast of guitar building chat where you can join the live stream or watch back on past episodes. Our Instagram page shares posts of members' builds and links you direct to their accounts. And for those of you on Facebook, we've got a private group that you can join, share and chat along with. The Guitar Builders Collective is a welcome and open space for all, so do pop by and say hi.